Welcome to SportsBeat KC, the sports podcast of the Kansas City Star and KCUR. It's Tuesday, February 17th, and I'm Blair Kirchhoff. There's been a big shakeup at Kansas State. On Sunday night, the school dismissed men's basketball coach Jerome Tang. Athletic director Gene Taylor said Tang was fired with cause, citing the coach's comments in recent press conferences. Kellis Robinett, who covers the Wildcats, will bring us up to date with the developments in Manhattan. But first, we're talking World Cup soccer with Star columnist Sam McDowell. 2 months ago, we learned what teams would be playing games in Kansas City, and last week we officially learned who would be staying in Kansas City. 3 of soccer's most powerful teams, Argentina, England, and Netherlands, announced Kansas City as their summer home. We'll get into why they wanted to be in the Heartland. Finally, I'll have some final thoughts and tell you what's on my radar in Kansas City sports this week. Sam McDowell's here. Hello, Sam.
Hey, Blair. How's it going?
Good. How about the news last week? I think going into last week, I think only Argentina had announced that officially announced that its base camp was going to be in Kansas City. And by the end of the week, England and Netherlands had made it official. But it's funny, it turns out Argentina was actually the last of those 3 to determine that Kansas City was going to be its summer home.
Yeah, they didn't visit until after the draw was announced. So I think, clearly they were persuaded by the fact that they play a match in Kansas City. I think the logistics made it easier for them. But even the people that guided them around, Alan Dietrich was sort of a former Sporting Kansas City COO, was sort of put in charge as like this lead tour guide. But there's a lot of people involved in this. And the people that took them around kind of had huddled up before and said, well, everyone knows Argentina's going to Miami. Lionel Messi plays there. Miami is still within a 3-hour flight to all of Argentina's group play matches in Dallas and Kansas City. So people just thought it was a foregone conclusion that they'd go there, and thought by the end of the trip, wait a minute, we might have a shot here to take it to Argentina. And they were already feeling pretty good about some other countries. So then it became like, which ones, as opposed to will we get, enough? That just was their frame of mind of thinking.
Yeah. Talking to Pam Kramer at the KC 2026 and other officials, they did a poor job of hiding their enthusiasm in the weeks leading up to the official announcements. I think they tried to hedge their bets a little bit by saying, yeah, we feel great about 2, and it would be fantastic if we got 3, and kind of left it at that. But then all of a sudden, the thing that changed it for me, I don't know about you, but was when Swope Park entered the conversation. All of a sudden, wait a second, Swope Soccer Village is a site that would be considered by one of the national teams. We already knew Compass Minerals, where Sporting Kansas City trains, was going to be the premier site, the one everybody wanted to use for training. And then the KC Currents practice facility, which is phenomenal. People would want that as well. And we thought, okay, those are the 2 places in Kansas City where countries would choose to train. And then Rock Chalk Park and Lawrence would be the 3rd. And then all of a sudden, we hear Swope Soccer Village is in play. How did that change the equation?
Yeah, a lot. You're right. England, from the people I've talked with who did lead these tours for all these countries, and I think there were 11 that came through Kansas City, they thought England was by far the most diligent group. They kind of wanted almost every day mapped out for exactly what they'd be doing, Sunday through Saturday of every week that they'd be here. And those tours became reflective of that, to where they saw, I think, more than some of the other countries did. And at one point, in one of their tours, England's visited 8 times. And at one of their tours, they had asked about, where's your first team going to train? If a country is going to take during the World Cup your first team,
Sporting's first team,
Compass Minerals, then where's Sporting Kansas City going to train? And so Alan Dietrich had just driven them by Swope Park, which was originally part of Kansas City's presentation to FIFA for why they could host base camps, for why they could host the World Cup itself. But I don't think a lot of people thought that some team would train there and consider it their base camp home. And England just assumed it was going to be in Kansas City. They actually tried to get FIFA to allow them to choose Kansas City before the draw even came out. FIFA said, well, you'll be happy with the order of selection process, to where I think England assumed that it was going to be purely based on world ranking. They're in the top 5, so they probably assumed, yes, we'll be fine. But then FIFA decided, okay, but within the pots, if you're all in that same pot one, which there's 12 teams, right?
Right. And USA, Mexico, and Canada are part of those.
Yes.
Yeah. So there's nine available.
That's right.
Because the U.S. had already decided it was training in California,
Yep.
and Mexico and Canada will train in their
Yep.
home countries.
And so there's nine left, and FIFA had said, well, if you're in the same pot, you're not going by world ranking. It's proximity to your group play matches. And I think England probably thought, oh, are we in trouble here? Who else is in Kansas City? I joked with Jake Reed when we talked to him. It's kind of like college recruitments. We're like, well, who else is in on this kid? Who else is looking at this school? And when Netherlands and Argentina both had matches in Kansas City, then Argentina visits Kansas City, and it became clear that, okay, you might be ranked ahead of the Netherlands, but they've got the proximity tiebreaker. Those two places are choosing Kansas City, and England reached back out and said, well, what about that place we visited your first team's training? What about Swope Park? Can we go there? And to me, the response to that speaks to why Kansas City has 3 teams, because they just figured it out. Sporting Kansas City still does not know where their first team's going to train. We're in February. I know this seems like a long way away to people, but to not know where your team's going to practice in 4 months, that just speaks to where they said, Jake Reed had a great quote to me. He said, you can't call yourselves the soccer capital of America and not figure out a way to get one of the top 7 teams in the country to train in your city.
Exactly. That really said a lot. And it also speaks to the effort that Kansas City put into its World Cup bid and to want to be a great host city that getting that 4th site in this region was not going to be a problem. Which you want to come here, we got the place for you. Heck, if a 5th team wanted to come here, they would have found, they'd have gone to UMKC or Park or, or St. Joe or something like that. That Kansas City would just, I thought that came through in the conversations that we had last week with Chris Long, the co-owner of the Kansas City Current, and Jake Reed, the president of Sporting Kansas City, with Kathy Nelson of Visit KC, and of course the Kansas City Sports Commission, that Kansas City, maybe more than any other city, and maybe it's because it's one of the smaller cities in the in the group, would do what it was going to be accommodating. They were going to do what it took to accommodate these countries.
Yeah, and that really is what spoke loudest among this whole process, is that Kansas City treated this like it was the biggest deal. And because it is a really big deal. I mean, this is a huge deal that they're getting 3 of the top 7 countries in the world are going to be base camped in Kansas City. It's a huge deal, but I don't know that New York or LA or Miami would have considered it that to have the same sort of gravity that it does in Kansas City. And to me, it's a really, quintessential Kansas City story in that way, is that, our leadership has long treated us like, we shouldn't be the underdog. People are overlooking us. And, once you visit here, you'll see what Kansas City is about. And I think that worked out for a lot of these countries. So I'm sure a lot of them were pleasantly surprised with what they saw when they came in, because as we know, England was curious about what they're going to do on their days off. It wasn't just about, I've seen a lot of people, and, obviously we've all written about this. Some people had said to me that, well, everyone just chose it based on its proximity and its fact it's centrally located. England's not playing here. They're not playing a match here.
Right. Not scheduled to have a match in the group stage.
And they were still curious what it's going to look like on their off days. And Kansas City had to fulfill that and said, well, here's what you can do on your days off. Here's some golf courses you can go to. There's businesses in Kansas City, that La Casa de Paddle that a bunch of Sporting Kansas City and former Sporting KC players own, will shut down to let England go there. Top Golf will shut down to let England go there. I mean, there's a lot of people that said, we'll do whatever it takes to make it work for these countries.
Kansas City Star columnist Sam McDowell is our guest. Okay, what role did Jack Stack play in this? In this?
That was probably the most entertaining story that I was told over this, was just that on Argentina's last night here, and I think they stayed for 4 days, Diedrich had said to him, do you guys have plans for dinner? And they said, no. He said, well, what do you want? Do you want Latin food or do you want to try Kansas City barbecue? And they all said, we'd love to try Kansas City barbecue. So he took them to the Freight House Jack Stack location and said they all ordered 2 meat platters, 5 of them. They ordered every single side that Jack Stack has on their menu. And he just goes, they killed it. And then they all ordered the desserts that Jack Stack has. And he goes, they killed that too. And he goes, they were just really impressed with Kansas City barbecue, which I just thought, people could read all about what the first part of the conversation we had, and still they'd probably be more entertained by that exact story because they're like, yes, they loved our barbecue.
Absolutely. And you mentioned earlier that after the draw happened, which was the first week in December, that's when Argentina first, discovered, where it was going to be playing and thought Kansas City would be a good place to have their base camp. They weren't the only ones who felt that way after the draw, as we learned. How many countries actually inquired about Kansas City?
Well, I think 11 actually came through Kansas City. I think there were a few more that were probably hoping they could win that proximity battle. I think Austria was very, very interested. I think France was pretty interested. I think it became clear to the people involved that one way or another, they would have 2 teams in Kansas City and 1 in Lawrence. I think the way it worked out was the only possible way they would get 3 teams in Kansas City, which is England's going to be left out and just so desperately wants Kansas City anyway. They're going to say, we'll figure out a place that works for us. And, you were with me when we were asking Jake Reed about that, the Sporty Kansas City team president, who's also on KC 2026's board. So he's been involved in this from multiple angles. But, we assumed that people watching the draw were probably saying, England didn't get a match close to Kansas City. That was a team that we wanted, and they get them anyway.
Yeah.
I think the one last piece of this is interesting is something I hadn't really heard people brought up until you started asking questions about it, though, which is the stuff that works against Kansas City sometimes to get big events, and probably the stuff they felt like they had to overcome to get the World Cup games themselves was something that really worked in their favor.
I've lived here for like 4 decades now, and I heard from and still have family and friends on the East Coast, and we travel all over the place to cover teams from Kansas City, and you hear about living in flyover country and how the ride from the airport to downtown is so long because Kansas City is so spread out, and you hear about and those of us who with the bi-state situation here, and how how it reared its head with the Chiefs and the new home recently, but a lot of that worked for Kansas City this time. That it was to Kansas City's advantage to have to be spread out and have little traffic issues, not the traffic issues that you see in LA and Atlanta.
I think Kathy Nelson told you to respond to your question and said, you could visit a lot of these different spots in a day. It wasn't, well, we'll have to get to that tomorrow because you got to go here and
got to plan
that's
the
a
traffic.
hassle. Yes. I mean, they could go to Sporting Kansas City and the Current, and in England's case, and Swope. Like that's easy to do in an afternoon in Kansas City.
And the other one of the graphics that I think had a big influence on Argentina was the times of flights from Kansas City to other places in the country, around the country. You can get to anywhere in the U.S. from Kansas City in 3 hours, 3.5 hours tops, and I think that had being in flyover country, being in the middle of the U.S. had a big advantage for KC this time. So, all right. So what is it going to mean to have 3 countries and likely a 4th? It's not official yet with Algeria, but we think they're going to be a base camped in Lawrence at Rock Chalk Park. They play 2 games in Kansas City. What is this going to do? What's it going to mean for us?
That's been really hard to get a grasp on. First, it's unprecedented for Kansas City. It'd be unprecedented if one of these teams was coming in.
Yes.
With 4 of these teams, I mean, I guess I'll Argentina, I think, is going to have the biggest fan base of these three teams. England doesn't play a match here, so I don't know whether their fans typically want to go where the team is base camped or whether they go from they're playing two friendlies in Miami onto their first match. The Netherlands, I assume, will have a lot of fans here. You're base camped here and a match. But I just heard Argentina's traveling party is immense, and there's a lot of people who will want to come who aren't planning on going to any of the matches. And I just kind of assumed, ignorantly that if you're going to a World Cup, you're going to see the matches. But, a lot of Argentinian fans just purely want to be where the team's at. They want to be together where the team's at. And so I think Argentina, even the match that isn't in Kansas City, there's two that aren't in Kansas City that Argentina plays, I think in Dallas.
Right, I think both in Dallas, yeah.
Like, I think those match days in Kansas City are going to be
could be wild.
Yeah.
Could be wild. I mean, I think that's Fan Fest would be open those days, and games would be televised. And
I think there's at least talk to open up a stadium to potentially have a big watch party at. And we've seen Missouri allow bars open 23 hours. I think it is. We've seen Kansas at least put a bill forth to see if maybe they can do the same thing. And it's just, I think it's really hard for Kansas City if you're not intricately involved in this to get a feel for what exactly is this going to look like in Kansas City. And to me, it feels like it could just be like a month-long party in Kansas City. And I think people who live here will find maybe a portion of it distracting, but the overwhelming portion will be some really great energy for the city.
Much more to learn and discover here as the weeks unfold. But Sam, great conversation. Thank you.
Yeah.
Kansas State will play the final few weeks of the men's basketball season with a new head coach. Jerome Tang, in his fourth year, was fired with cause on Sunday evening. Here to discuss what's happening in Manhattan is beat writer Kellis Robinett. Hello, Kellis.
Hey, Blair. How's it going?
It's going. Tell you what, the season had been, it'd been fading since conference play started, and the assumption was Jerome Tang was going to be out of a job at the end of this year, but athletic director Gene Taylor changed the timetable, didn't he? And now we have a coach out of a job who disagrees that with the clause that he was fired with cause and will fight that. We've got a mess in Manhattan right now, don't we?
Yeah, interesting times to be sure. You nailed it on the head there. Kansas State just got aggressive and moved up the timeline in the last week with some of the comments that Jerome Tang said. Some people on ESPN and other places were highly critical of him for saying things like Kansas State players didn't deserve to wear uniforms, didn't have enough school pride, saying they were going to get cut before next season, which is kind of a funny thing to say given his own, his own situation and the roster turnover that's available in Kansas State or in college basketball nationally right now. But still, he said it, and that's what Gene Taylor said was the final straw of sorts. He didn't like it. He was disturbed by what he said about the student athletes. When you combine that with, the worst Big 12 start they've ever had, it was time to get him out of there, and that's what they did.
They're 1-11 right now, the worst start for a conference in conference play ever for a K-State team. Let's listen to what Jerome Tang had to say. Set it up, Kellis. This is after the Cincinnati game, I believe.
Yeah, so they lose to Cincinnati 91-62 in a game that was more or less a pick 'em. I believe Cincinnati was favored by 1.5. I was foolish enough to pick Kansas State to win this game, actually. I thought they'd come out with their hair on fire and win at home. The opposite happened, and Tang was as mad about it as anybody.
All right, so here's what Jerome Tang had to say after the loss to Cincinnati.
This was embarrassing. These dudes do not deserve to wear this uniform. There will be very few of them in it next year. I'm embarrassed for the university. I'm embarrassed for our fans, our student section. It is it is just ridiculous. We got practice at 6 a.m. tomorrow morning, and and we will get this thing right. I I have no answer and no words. So y'all got two questions. So whoever want to ask two questions, I'll answer them to the best of my ability right now. But right now, like I'm like pissed, and this yeah this is all right.
So that was Jerome Tang after the 30-point loss to Cincinnati, and that is that's throwing the team under the bus a bit for sure. Certainly coming down hard on the team, but the $18 million question for Kansas State is that enough to fire a coach with cause and not have to pay the $18 million?
Yeah, it is, and will it hold up over time? I don't know. I think that'll be ultimately for a judge to decide, or even more likely for these two sides to settle on in negotiations with attorneys out of court. That seems to me like what is trying to be done here. I mean, it's just an interesting debate because if, say, I don't know. Bill Self went on some kind of tirade like this in a year where they're, on pace to be a number one seed, and he's had all the success. People probably say, "Hey, this is great." He's,
Motivating his
players.
team.
Yeah, yeah. But that just really wasn't the case with Jerome Tang this year. His message changed after every game. You look back, they lost by a similar margin to Iowa State, and I asked him what was the most disappointing thing about the effort, and he said nothing, and basically said, how could we dare criticize the players? They were above reproach. He loved his guys. And then a week later to turn around and just throw him under the bus like that, I think had people more puzzled than anything. But yeah, you've got a coach who kept saying different things, but the results stayed the same. They kept losing, made a lot of people angry. I think it's one thing to do one or the other, but then you combine them, it just escalates things. And we'll see what happens with the buyout. If he's fired without cause, his buyout is a whopping $18.7 million, which obviously would be hard for Kansas State to pay over the next 2 years. That's what it says in his contract. They have 2 years to pay it. If they fire him successfully with cause, potentially the buyout could be zero. I think ultimately they're going to end up somewhere in the middle, say between 6 and 10 million. But that's just pure speculation. We'll have to wait and see what happens there.
So, Kellis, after an incredible first year for Jerome Tang, they get to the Elite Eight. You and I covered their games in Greensboro that year. They beat Kentucky in the second round, and then they had that wonderful win over Michigan State in the Sweet 16 in Madison Square Garden, and of course lost to Florida Atlantic in the regional final. But unbelievable year. Marquise Noel, the star point guard of that team, had not been back, missed the NCAA tournament the next 2 years. And of course, he was in his third year, and they were absolutely going to miss the tournament this year. Just a couple of reasons why, what went wrong? How did it kind of get off the rails for Jerome Tang in Kansas State?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, he's going to go down as potentially the biggest one-hit wonder in college basketball
Yes.
history.
Yep.
I think you brought this up. It's very hard to end your coaching tenure with a 3-1 record in the NCAA tournament. That is just crazy. It means you had one great year and never got back. And I think more than anything, I think just the stars aligned for him in year one. He inherited Marquise Noel, who in hindsight was probably the perfect player for him. Thinking back, he liked Jerome so much that he went to the athletic director and said, please hire this person. When he came in, I didn't know Marquise Noel to be a religious person, but he asked Jerome Tang basically to baptize him and went all in on not only Jerome Tang the coach, Jerome Tang the man, Jerome Tang the preacher, everything. So Jerome had an extension of himself on the court that season. And Marquise was also a fabulous player. So you got a point guard who can distribute, play the way Jerome wants, and then they kind of not stumble in, but get fortunate to have Keontae Johnson, Naquan Tomlin on the roster, these guys that other people weren't necessarily looking at for one reason or another. They both turned out to be future NBA players. So all of a sudden you've got this really good roster. They put things together. They have a magical run. Since then, they haven't had any of that. They haven't had a true point guard like Marquise Noel. They haven't had a lot of players who buy into, the Tang philosophy quite as much. And it just seemed like every year, instead of building on what they had previously, they were just trying to start over from scratch. And that's not necessarily the best strategy when you have a great year. You want to keep it rolling. You don't want to rebuild. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I think Jerome Tang too often was trying to fix things. And I mean, it's interesting. He was the first coach I ever heard say that he wanted basically to buy wins. When the NIL came out, he said he wanted to take advantage of this as much as he could. He wanted to just pay the best roster possible, kind of like the Texas Tech football philosophy, which worked for them. Unfortunately, the execution on his part never could bring in the right players. Gives $2 million to Coleman Hawkins, who, while he was an okay player, he was never going to carry a team to the NCAA tournament or anything like that. So, and then this year, instead of going that route, they bring in a bunch of Europeans, and they haven't had much success. It's just interesting. He seemed like he cracked the code in year one, and then never tried something else all 3 other years, and never worked for him.
And then the code cracked him in years 2 and 3.
Yes, exactly.
So you're right. I see a team that just with poor roster construction over the last couple years, and they did spend the money, absolutely spent money on the roster, but just pieces that didn't seem to fit together well. And here we are with a team that stands right now 10-15, and as you said, 1-11 in the Big 12. Okay, so where do the Cats go from here? You've already come up with a list. You have to come up with a list right away of the coaching successors. Who is foremost on that list of next head basketball coach at K-State?
Yeah, so it is interesting. It feels a little different than a few years ago when they parted ways with Bruce Weber, just because everybody saw that coming. Everybody had time to compile a list. Gene Taylor had time to make it all season to make his list, basically. So they were ready to go. The moment they fired him, the next day they were meeting with Jerome Tang in Kansas City. They were interviewing candidates. They were ready to go. I don't think that's where they are right now. Nobody, as we already mentioned, expected them to be fired midseason. So I think they've been focused on getting past that more so than, hey, let's get the 5 names we absolutely have to talk to. But nevertheless, I do think I know some people they want to talk to. And I'll just throw out some names here. Obviously, the number one dream choice, the Colin Klein equivalent for the basketball team would be Brad Underwood at Illinois. I'll admittedly say the odds are very low. I don't know why he would leave Illinois at this point in his career, but maybe he just feels compelled to save K-State basketball. He's an alum. It's not outside the realm of possibility. So we'll put him out there as the extreme long shot. I think if you look at more realistic candidates, I think Josh Schertz at St. Louis would be an excellent choice. Gene Taylor said he wants to prioritize head coaching experience this time around. He wants a guy who's won everywhere he's been. And that's this guy. He's won Division II. He's won at Indiana State, and now he's killing it at St. Louis. They're going to be, I imagine there's going to be a lot of people that want to hire him with openings this season, but Kansas State's got a head start. They've not been afraid to spend money on basketball before. Maybe that works out. A couple other names, I'll say Jared Calhoun at Utah State. Same deal. He's won at Youngstown State. He's won at Utah State. I think he even has some lower level experience there too. Eric Olin at New Mexico. Same deal. He's won at D2. He's won at D1. Now he's won at New Mexico. There's some good options out there. I think more likely than not, you'll probably see Kansas State just hire kind of like what they did with Chris Kleiman 7 years ago. A proven winner, high floor, maybe not the most exciting name on the market, but somebody who can come in and add, bring instant credibility back to this program. So I think you'll see stuff like that. A couple other names: Travis Steele at Miami of Ohio, Brian Hodgson's at USF, and one wild card I'll throw out there: Mike Boynton.
Ooh, Mike Boynton.
I know he just got fired not long ago at Oklahoma State, so you might cringe a little bit and say, really? But Michigan has killed it ever since he joined that staff. So
he had Cade Cunningham too, right? Did he recruit Cade Cunningham?
Yeah, he recruited Cade Cunningham, who's turned into be one of the best players in the NBA. I think he might be worth kicking the tires on.
All right. Good stuff, Kellis. Thank you so much.
Anytime, Blair.
Here's what's on my radar in Kansas City sports this week. A new era begins for Sporting Kansas City. It's the season opener and the first game for new coach Raphael Wicke. Sporting plays at the San Jose Earthquakes Saturday at 9:30 p.m. The game will be broadcast on Apple TV. Also this week, the Royals will play their first spring training game. That's right, on Friday, it's the traditional opener against the team they share the complex with in Surprise, Arizona, the Texas Rangers. The Royals' regular season opener is March 27th at the Atlanta Braves. That'll do it for this week. Thanks to our SportsBeat KC production staff of Gabriella Lacey, Suzanne Hogan, Irvin Zhang, and Monty Davis, and to our editors Jeff Rosen and Scott Chasen. We'll be back soon with another SportsBeat KC, where we talk sports in Kansas City.